Welcome to Wild West Love Chronicles. Today, I'll be telling you a deeply touching and thrilling story. Let's listen closely. They called him Bear, though no one remembered his real name when they whispered it behind his back. Just Bear. Big as an oak, quiet as snowfall, hair like wet iron and hands like split logs, Elias McGraw had lived alone for so long in the forest outside Whistle Bend that children made up stories about him. Some frightening, some sad, all exaggerated. He rarely came into town, and when he did, it was always the same: supplies, silence, and a long walk back before the sun got too low. His arrival was never grand. One bootstep at a time, a wrapped pack over his shoulder. Beard tangled, eyes like frost, hard and still. He never lingered, never smiled, never answered more than he had to. And though the townsfolk had grown used to his annual visits, they never truly welcomed them. He was a reminder of something they didn't quite understand, something rough and unfinished, like an old wound never properly stitched. But this morning, the frost clung longer to the branches, and the light had a strange tint to it, muted, golden, like the woods were holding their breath. Elias felt it too. There was a pull in his chest, deep and unfamiliar. He'd dreamt the night before of a river he didn't recognize and a woman singing, her voice far away. Dreams didn't visit him often. When they did, he remembered them. His boots sank deep into the mud as he crossed the timber bridge into Whistle Bend. The town, quiet most days, was alive with an uneasy kind of noise. Voices clipped with tension, laughter too loud to be real. Something was happening in the square. Elias paused, eyes narrowed beneath his thick brow. He didn't care for crowds, didn't trust them. Still, he walked toward the commotion, his heavy footsteps thudding over the wooden walkways. He passed familiar buildings, the butcher's shop with its cracked windows, the old saloon where he'd once broken a man's nose, and the general store that sold salt, nails, and gossip in equal measure. Then he saw it, a makeshift stage, just a wagon really, with a plank set across it. A man in a top hat, too clean for this place, stood high, shouting into the crowd. Below him stood women, some older, some girls who looked no older than 15. Dirt smudged their faces, clothes clung to bony frames, and none of them met anyone's gaze. Their wrists were bound. Some cried. Others stared past the crowd, their minds already gone somewhere else. "Debts," the auctioneer cried. "Unpaid debts, gentlemen. These fine women are offered today to settle what their households cannot. Legal, documented, and guaranteed." It was rare, barbaric even. Most towns had outlawed the practice. But Whistle Bend wasn't most towns. Far enough from the law, deep enough in the woods, where coin and power still made their own rules. Elias watched in silence. His fists curled at his sides. He'd seen things like this before, during the war, after it. Desperate men, selling their daughters, their wives, their dignity, while the crowd looked on and weighed women like they did cattle. A girl was sold for $12, another for $8. The third, an older woman no longer of childbearing age, was sold for $5, though the buyer made a show of being disgusted by her attitude, and then came the last one. The crowd hushed without being asked. The auctioneer shifted uneasily. From the back of the wagon a woman stepped forward. No shackles, no tears. She wore a long black shawl, wrapped tightly around her frame. But what stunned the crowd into silence was her face, or lack of it. A porcelain mask covered her entirely from forehead to chin. Smooth, white, with 2 small eye holes and sculpted lips that gave nothing away. Not a flinch, not a sound. Just silence. She stood, hands folded in front of her, like she was in church. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Last one of the day. Quiet type. Doesn't say much. But don't let the mask fool you, gents. She's whole underneath. No disfigurements, I'm told. Family insisted on the mask. Religious reasons, modesty and such. A lie. Obvious and flimsy. The crowd stared. Then came the laughter. Modesty, huh? One man jeered. Maybe she's a ghoul under there. Take it off, another called. Hell, I'll give you a nickel just to smash the thing. The auctioneer chuckled nervously. Come now, fellas, she's fit and healthy. Don't need much food, I imagine. Let's start the bidding at $10. Silence. 5? Nothing. She won't bite, the auctioneer said, trying to tease out a chuckle. Not unless you ask her to. Still, not a hand raised. Then, something moved. A shadow at the back of the crowd. Elias stepped forward. He didn't say a word. Just reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. From it, he counted out 5 silver dollars and set them down on the corner of the stage. The coins made a crisp, metallic sound that cut through the murmurs like a blade. The auctioneer blinked. You, sir? Elias gave a single nod. Ah, well sold then. To the gentleman in flannel and beard, enjoy. Laughter erupted, but it wasn't kind. Men slapped each other on the back. Women shook their heads. Hell, Bear just bought himself a ghost. He gonna marry it or chop it down like one of his trees? Maybe she don't talk 'cause she saw him naked. Elias ignored it all, turned, without a word. He didn't even look back to see if she followed. But she did, soft footsteps behind him. Light, almost silent, like she belonged to another world entirely. They left the square, the town, the voices, back across the bridge, through the woods that swallowed sound and made even memory fade. He didn't speak to her. She didn't speak to him. Hours passed. Trees thickened. Shadows lengthened. The snow returned, falling like ash through the evergreens. The air was sharp with pine, and the wind carried the scent of cedar and distant firewood. When they reached the cabin, the sky was nearly black. Elias opened the door and stepped aside. She paused, only for a second, then walked inside. The cabin was simple. A hearth made of river stones. A small table. A single chair. A bed on one side. A bearskin rug on the other. No pictures, no clock. Just wood and silence. He lit a fire. The room warmed slowly. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, facing the flames. Still masked. Still silent. Elias poured water into a tin cup, set it near her, then sat in the chair. His bones ached. His back cracked as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. For a long time they didn't move. Outside, the wolves howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And somewhere in that cabin, something invisible began to shift. Like two strangers on either side of a frozen river, hearing the first cracks of thaw beneath their feet. The first days passed like fog rolling low over the river, silent, slow, without edges. Clara moved like a ghost in Elias's cabin, careful with each step, never too near, never in the way. She spoke no words. She made no sound beyond the soft rustling of fabric and the clink of tin cups as she cleaned them after meals. Elias didn't press her, didn't ask. He wasn't a man who needed noise to fill space. He woke before the sun like he always did, the chill of mountain air pressing in through the thin walls. Before, the mornings had been filled with only the groan of timber, the crack of joints stiff from sleep, and the whistle of the kettle over flame. Now there was a second presence, faint as a shadow on the snow. Her. She would already be awake, sweeping the ashes from the hearth or folding the same blanket twice over. Always in that mask. Always wrapped in that long black shawl, as if the world could not be trusted with the truth of her skin. On the third morning, Elias found his boots patched. Not new, just mended. Stitches. Tight, clever, done with an old leather strap he hadn't touched in months. He noticed the broom, once crooked and frayed, had been trimmed and bound properly. His cabin, though never quite dirty, now felt orderly, cared for, as though something had been missing all this time and neither he nor the wood itself had known until now. She never asked permission to touch his things, but she handled them with such grace, such softness, that even the axe leaning by the door seemed to relax in her presence. That night, Elias sat near the hearth, sharpening his blade with slow, practiced strokes. The fire cast long shadows across the walls, and snow tapped lightly against the small window. Clara sat across the room, her posture still and upright, hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't eaten much, a few bites of potato and a small piece of dried meat. Elias watched her carefully, not with suspicion, but with a kind of reverent curiosity. The mask turned toward the flames. Its blank eyes caught the flicker and swallowed it whole. "You don't have to clean," Elias said at last. His voice was rough, like tree bark split in winter. "Not unless you want to." She didn't answer. He set the knife down on the table and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes narrowing at the glow of fire. "I don't need much." Still silence. And then, like a whisper stirred by wind, her voice came, not loud, but clear, wrapped in calmness that didn't quite hide the fear beneath. "I need to do something," she said. "Or I'll disappear." Elias looked up. Her voice didn't match the stillness of her body. It had the music of someone once confident, educated maybe. He wondered what kind of life she'd had before someone decided she was worth 5 silver coins. "You're not disappearing," he muttered. "You don't know that." Her answer came too quickly, too sharply. Then silence again, as though she regretted speaking at all. The fire crackled between them. Elias said nothing more, just reached for his knife and resumed his work, but slower now. Something had shifted. A thread, once buried deep, had tugged itself loose in the hush of the room. The next day she spoke again, without being asked. "Do you ever miss anyone?" Elias didn't look up from his task. He was whittling a handle for the old axe, shaving down the wood with careful strokes. The question hung in the air like the smell of pine sap, sticky and persistent. He paused. "Sometimes," he said, "when the trees are quiet." Clara stood by the window, watching the snow gather at the edge of the sill. She held her arms close to her body as if the cold lived inside her bones. "I used to sing," she said. Elias raised his brow, but didn't reply. "I was good at it." "That's what they used to say." "Why'd you stop?" She turned slightly toward him, the mask gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. "No one wants to hear a ghost sing," she said. "And sometimes I'm afraid I'll hear myself and remember who I used to be." The wind shifted outside, rattling the shutters. Elias didn't try to comfort her. He didn't know how. Instead, he rose, took a handful of kindling, and placed it carefully on the fire. The flames leapt, casting shadows across the room. "I wouldn't mind hearing it," he said, and walked away. She didn't sing that night, but she hummed, quietly, just before the fire died, and Elias didn't sleep until the sound faded. On the 7th morning, she was already out in the snow, gathering wood from the stack behind the cabin. Elias watched her from the doorway. Her movements were precise, practiced, not the work of a delicate woman. Her shoulders were strong beneath the shawl, her pace sure-footed. Whoever she had been, she had lived hard. The mask, still firmly in place, caught the light like ice. The days moved like streams cutting through thaw. The silence between them changed. It softened, turned from isolation to shared quiet. They didn't speak often, but when they did, it mattered. She began to ask him things. "What's it like to live this far from everyone?" "Peaceful," he'd say. "Don't you get lonely?" "Only when the birds leave." And sometimes, more personal questions. "Why do they call you Bear?" He smirked then, the first time she'd seen it. It creased his face like a map of forgotten joy. "Because I don't hibernate," he answered. "Even when I should." She laughed. Just once, a soft sound, like the edge of a bell in the wind. One night, the snow thick outside, and the fire glowing bright. Clara stood by the window again. The moon spilled across her mask, painting it in silver. "Would you ask me to take it off?" she asked. Elias didn't move. "No." She turned to him. "Why not?" "It's yours," he said. "Not mine to ask." Clara nodded, slow and quiet. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't have to. Days passed, then weeks. The thaw began early that year. Birds returned sooner than usual, and the air took on the scent of pine needles and damp moss. One morning, Elias woke to find a book open on the table. He hadn't owned any books in years. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. Poetry. Clara's. She had placed it there before dawn. That evening, she read aloud. Her voice filled the cabin like something sacred, something stolen from another world, and returned only briefly. She read Yeats, softly, carefully, with the rhythm of someone who had read it often in better times. When she stopped, Elias was staring at her, not the mask, not the figure, but her. "You got a name?" he asked. She looked at him. "Clara." He nodded. "Clara," he repeated, as though tasting it for the first time. She looked down. "That's not the name he gave me." Elias didn't ask who he was. She looked back at him. "But it's mine." From then on, he used it. Not once did he call her girl or woman or anything else the town might have spat at her. Only Clara. Always Clara. One night, a sudden storm hit. Rain and hail thrashing the roof. Wind howling through the trees like some ancient spirit. The fire nearly died. Elias moved quickly, shoving more wood into the hearth, covering the windows. Clara stood close behind him, trembling slightly. When the thunder cracked, she flinched. "Used to sleep through cannon fire," Elias said. "Can't stand lightning, though." Clara didn't speak. Her hands were tight at her sides. He looked at her, then slowly, carefully, extended his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. Her fingers were colder than ice, but they didn't shake. The storm passed, eventually, but neither moved until the last rumble faded into silence. By spring, the land had begun to green. The stream behind the cabin thawed. Squirrels returned. Sap rose in the trees. And still, Clara wore the mask, but she no longer looked away when she spoke, no longer stepped around him like a stranger. Her voice had changed, warmer, steadier. One morning, as they prepared to walk into town together, for flour, nails, and maybe a bar of soap, Clara paused near the door. Elias was already pulling on his coat. "Do you care?" she asked softly. He turned. "About the mask. Do you wonder why?" "I do," he admitted. "But I figure if you want me to know, you'll tell me." She nodded. Then, just before stepping outside, she added, "Thank you for seeing me, even like this." He didn't answer, just held the door open as she walked past. The road ahead was long and muddy with melting snow. But they walked side by side now, two shadows in the dawn, neither leading, neither following, just walking together, not towards something, not away, just forward. The fire had burned low, but neither of them moved to stoke it. It was late, later than they usually sat up, and yet the silence between them was not sleepiness, nor was it comfort. It was anticipation. Clara sat at the edge of the chair she now called hers, knees drawn up, her shawl loosely draped over her shoulders. Her mask caught the flickering firelight and gleamed like bone. She had read again that night. Dickinson this time. Short, clipped phrases with so much space between the words it almost hurt to hear them aloud. Elias sat across from her, not carving, not working, not moving, just watching. The air had thickened with something unnamed. Not tension, not exactly, but something deeper. The kind of weight that came before a truth broke loose. Outside, the snow had receded, and the sound of water dripping from the eaves was the only indication that spring was winning its slow war with winter. Clara tilted her head slightly. "You ever been branded?" Elias's brow furrowed. The question didn't come like a joke. It landed like a stone in a quiet pond. Branded? She nodded, slowly. He hesitated. Once, during the war, Confederate caught me running from a camp, burned a letter into my shoulder, said Y for Yankee. I killed him before it healed. She didn't flinch. Do you still see it? Sometimes, he said. Not in the mirror, but when the rain comes and my skin itches where it used to. Clara looked down at her hands, thumb brushing across her knuckles like she was trying to memorize the texture of her own skin. I have one too, she said quietly. Elias didn't say anything. He waited. She continued. He put it there after I tried to run, said I'd forget who I was if he didn't mark me, said I was his property. Her voice trembled, not from weakness but from restraint. He didn't just want to own my body. He wanted to own my shame. The fire popped. A log shifted, and sparks scattered briefly into the dark. Elias leaned forward slightly, his voice low and steady. You ain't his. Not now. Not ever again. She didn't respond. Her hands moved to her lap, fingers gripping the shawl so tightly that her knuckles went pale. Her mask turned toward the fire again, like it always did when she didn't want to be seen. I can't sleep, she whispered. You've been sleeping fine the last few nights, Elias said gently. I mean real sleep, she replied. The kind where your body forgets to flinch. He watched her carefully. What keeps you awake? His voice, she said. I still hear him every time I close my eyes. Not shouting, whispering, as if he's behind me, as if he never left. She stood, suddenly, pacing toward the window. Outside, the trees swayed faintly in the wind, their bare branches scratching at the glass like fingers begging to come inside. Elias didn't move. He came from a family with land, Clara continued, her voice now brittle. He wore gloves every day, even to eat. Said dirt was for the help, but the blood under his fingernails, that was fine. He was the kind of man who believed women were like horses, meant to be broken in and kept useful. And he enjoyed the breaking. That brand, she paused, swallowing hard. It's not just a scar, it's a silence. It tells the world I was owned. Her hands trembled. She turned from the window but didn't walk back. I know what you're thinking, she said. That it was long ago. That I'm safe now. That I should take off this mask and let the world see I survived. Elias said nothing. But surviving isn't the same as healing. Still, he didn't speak. Her voice softened. I need you to understand, Elias. I didn't come here because I was rescued. I came because I was running. And I don't know if I've stopped yet. He finally stood, walked over to the fireplace. He reached slowly, took the poker, stirred the fire until the flames rose high again. Then he turned to her. I don't want you to take off the mask, he said. Not for me, not for them. Not until you're ready. And even then, only if you want to. Clara's shoulders fell, just a little, enough to release some part of the fear holding her ribs together. She moved back toward the chair but didn't sit. Instead, she stood beside it, facing him. I want to show you something, she said. Elias didn't answer. He waited. With a slow breath, Clara reached up and pulled back the hood of her shawl. Her fingers moved to the mask. They hesitated, hovered, then pressed at the seam beneath her chin. A quiet click echoed through the room as the porcelain loosened. She lifted it, slowly, carefully, and held it in both hands like something sacred and painful. Her face was pale beneath it, the skin of her cheeks and chin smooth but gaunt. Her eyes were wide and glassy with fear. But the brand was unmistakable. It covered the right side of her face, burned deep, healed poorly. A crude design, part symbol, part letter, scorched into her skin with no care for symmetry or healing. It twisted from her cheekbone down toward her jaw, its edges rough and raised. Time had faded the rawness, but not the meaning. Elias didn't step back. He didn't look away. He looked at her. Not the scar, not the story behind it. Her. Clara held the mask low at her side, her other hand half curled against her waist, as if waiting for something to strike. But Elias just nodded once. I see you. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down the unmarked side of her face. She didn't wipe it away. I'm not that girl anymore, she whispered. "But sometimes I forget." "You don't have to remember every part," Elias said. "Only the ones that make you stronger." She let out a breath that shook her shoulders. "I wore that mask for 4 years," she said. "Even in my sleep." Elias gestured to the chair. She sat slowly, as if unsure her body still knew how to relax. He moved to the table, poured 2 cups of water, brought one to her. She took it with both hands, fingers trembling slightly against the tin. He sat beside her, not across this time, but near. They drank in silence. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, Elias remained by the fire. He stared into the flames and remembered the men he'd known in war. Men who wore medals but hid their brokenness beneath their uniforms. He thought of the letter branded into his own skin, long faded now, but still real when the cold came. He reached for his shirt collar, pulled it down, and traced the scar with one rough finger. It didn't burn anymore, but it had once. He looked toward Clara's bed. She slept turned toward the wall, the mask set gently on the table beside her. She had taken it off. Not for him, for herself. The next morning, she didn't wear it. When Elias walked in from chopping wood, he found her at the table, hair down, scar bared in the soft morning light. She looked up, met his eyes, and said simply, "I think I'd like to sing today." And she did. Her voice, though shaky at first, grew with each note. It was low and lilting, shaped by memory and pain, but beautiful all the same. Elias closed his eyes and listened, not to the song, but to the woman who had been hidden for so long beneath a mask of porcelain and fear. Clara. She was singing herself back to life. The wind came harder that morning, heavy with dust and the scent of distant rain. The trees swayed like old giants murmuring to one another, and the birds that had returned weeks ago were now eerily quiet. Elias noticed at first that sharp change in the air, the way the woods hushed themselves when something unnatural stirred on the edges. He was kneeling in the soil beside the creek that curved behind the cabin, setting a new line of fencing to keep the mule from wandering too far. He paused, hand still gripping a nail, head turning toward the north trail. Something was coming. He didn't go back to work. Instead, he stood, slow and still, letting the wind speak to him. It was a voice he trusted more than any preacher or lawman. The trees didn't lie. They didn't gossip or twist truths into stories. When they fell silent, when the birds fled and the wind tasted like iron and smoke, Elias knew what it meant. Danger. Clara was inside, baking something. She had taken to cooking more lately, like the act of kneading dough or grinding herbs gave her a sense of presence, a physical return to the world. He liked the smell of bread now. He hadn't remembered that before her. He walked into the cabin. She glanced up, flour on her cheek, a smile forming at the edge of her lips, but it died the moment she saw his face. "What is it?" He didn't sugar it. "Riders. From town. 3, maybe 4. Hooves too heavy for traders." Her eyes didn't widen, didn't flash. They simply went cold. That still, frightening cold he'd only seen once before, when she told him her story. She didn't need to ask who. Elias nodded. "Might be him. Might be someone else sent for you. Either way, it's not good." She wiped her hand slowly on the apron, removed it, and hung it on the peg by the door. Her movements were deliberate. No panic, no flinching. "He found me," she said quietly. Elias walked to the corner of the room, opened the chest, and pulled out the rifle. It was old but oiled well, wrapped in linen, its barrel clean and straight. He loaded it in silence. Clara moved behind him, not touching, but close. "I don't want to run," she said. "You won't," he answered. She hesitated. "He'll try to take me. He'll fail." There was no boast in his voice, no bravado, just truth. They spent the next hour preparing, wordless but in perfect rhythm. Elias stacked firewood at the rear door, moved the mule deeper into the woods, tied it off at the base of the ravine. Clara poured water into glass jugs, wrapped food in cloth, packed it into the sack as if she were preparing for winter. Her hands didn't shake. When the first rider appeared at the edge of the clearing, the sun was high, casting gold across the tops of the trees. The man was tall, lean, and wore a dark gray coat that billowed behind him like a ghost's tail. His horse was black, its snout frothing, restless. Behind him came two more, both armed, both with the posture of hired killers. And then the last man arrived, the fourth rider. He wore a long, pale coat, finely pressed. His boots were polished, gleaming despite the mud. His hat sat low over his brow, shadowing his face, but Clara didn't need to see him. She stepped to the window and stared. "That's him," she said. Elias was already standing at the door, rifle in hand. He didn't open it. Not yet. "Stay inside," he told her. "I'm not hiding. You're not. You're surviving." She wanted to argue, but didn't. Instead, she nodded, picked up the second rifle he'd placed beside the hearth, and crouched low near the back window. Elias stepped outside. The pale-coated man smiled. "McGraw," he said, voice silk wrapped around a blade. "I was told you were reasonable." Elias didn't smile. "You were told wrong." The man's expression didn't flicker. "I've come for the girl. You're harboring a fugitive. She's stolen property." "No one's property here." She was branded. "You know what that means." "I know what it means to cowards." The pale man shifted in his saddle. "You bought her. Don't pretend you're some holy man. You paid $5 just like anyone else could have." "I didn't pay for her. I paid for peace. Yours or hers. I let her choose. She chose to stay. You think that makes her yours?" "No," Elias said. "It makes her free." The man's smile vanished. He dismounted. The others followed suit. Hands drifted toward holsters. Elias raised his rifle slightly. "This land's mine," he said. "Step 1 foot further, and I won't ask twice." The leader tilted his head. "You really think you can shoot all of us?" "I don't need to. I just need to make it cost too much." For a moment, no one moved. Then the gunfire started. The first shot came from the woods. One of the hired men tried to flank. Clara had seen it coming through the back window and fired without hesitation. The bullet took the man in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the brush. The other two moved quick, one ducking behind a tree stump, the other crouching low and firing at the cabin. Elias didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee and took aim. His bullet caught the crouched man just above the hip. A scream rang out, high and sharp. The pale man fired wildly, not at Elias but at the cabin, windows shattering, wood splintering. Clara crouched low, waiting. Another shot cracked. Elias turned, heart hammering. One of the men had looped wide through the trees, came running toward the porch, gun raised. Elias dropped him with a blast that echoed through the valley. The smoke hung in the air like ghosts. The pale man stood alone now, his coat spattered with blood that wasn't his. He breathed hard, chest rising and falling, rage swallowing the mask of composure. "You don't know what she is," he shouted. "You don't know what she's done." "I don't need to," Elias said. "I know who she is now." "She's mine!" he screamed. Elias stepped forward. "No," he said. "She's hers." The final shot didn't come from Elias. It came from behind. Clara had stepped out, rifle in her arms, hair wind-tossed, face bare, scar glowing like fire in the sunlight. She fired once. The pale man staggered, hand to his chest. He dropped to his knees, then crumpled into the mud. The woods fell silent again. No birds, no wind, just the crackle of dying echoes. Clara stood still for a moment, rifle clutched in both hands. Then she dropped it. Her breath came shallow and ragged, but her eyes were steady. Elias moved to her slowly, checked her for wounds. There were none. Just the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. She looked up at him. "It's over," she said. He nodded. "Now it begins." They buried the bodies deep in the woods, marked no graves, spoke no words. The town wouldn't ask questions. Whistlebend had a way of forgetting things that made it uncomfortable. And Elias McGraw was not a man to be questioned lightly. That night, the fire burned high, and Clara did not sit in the shadows. She sat beside Elias on the bench, their shoulders touching. The scar on her face no longer looked like a brand, it looked like armor. Elias poured them each a drink. He raised his cup. "To freedom," he said. Clara raised hers. "To the price of it." And, for the first time, when she looked into the fire, she didn't turn away. Spring came fast that year, as if the earth had been waiting too long to bloom. The river thawed early, gushing down from the mountains in silver ribbons that cut through the forest with a hunger. Buds split open on branches that had been bare for months, and birdsong returned in a choir, louder than memory. The world around the cabin didn't just change, it exhaled. Elias stood on the porch with his sleeves rolled up and a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. The wood beneath his boots was still damp from the morning mist, and the scent of pine mixed with the bread Clara was baking inside. He watched the trees like he always did. They were taller now, not in height, but in presence, as if they too had survived something they would never speak of. She stepped outside quietly, barefoot, her dress brushing the edge of the doorway. The scar on her face was exposed to the sunlight, no longer hidden, no longer the first thing people saw. Her hair was loose, braided down her back, and there was flour on her forearm. Elias looked over at her and she smiled, not the thin, cautious curve she had worn when she first arrived, but a full, gentle one that reached her eyes. "You always drink it cold," she said. Elias shrugged. "Still works." She walked down the steps and into the grass, letting her feet press into the earth. The land was softer now. The ground didn't resist anymore. For weeks after the fight, after they buried the men who came for her, Clara had stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but reflection. The kind of silence that meant something was breaking open and rearranging itself. Elias didn't question it. He didn't ask her to explain or talk or move forward faster than she was ready. He simply existed beside her, planting when she planted, chopping when she asked, and listening when she needed stillness. The mask had not returned to the table since the day she set it down. It had found its place buried beneath the roots of the oldest tree on the ridge, the one she chose herself. She dug the hole slowly, and she whispered something before she placed it inside, something Elias didn't ask to hear. Then she covered it and left it there, without ceremony or grief. He walked down the steps now and followed her into the tall grass. The trees swayed above them, their leaves fresh and green. And when they reached the edge of the clearing, Clara pointed toward the old cedar that had split during the last storm. "I want to get married here," she said. Elias blinked. "You don't have to say anything right away," she added quickly. I would," he said, cutting her off softly. "I would marry you right here, right now, if the river didn't need to see it." She turned to him, that same full smile returning, deeper this time, rooted in something unshakable. "I don't need a dress or a minister, just you and this place." He nodded. "Then we'll marry under the cedar." They chose the following Sunday. No invitations, no announcements. Word traveled quietly through Whistlebend, not by proclamation, but by the kind of rumor that grows gentle in the telling. Some said Elias had lost his mind, marrying a scarred woman who never spoke much. Others, the ones who mattered, said nothing, just showed up. Only a handful came. The blacksmith who'd once fixed Elias's trap for free, the widow who sold Clara cloth and didn't flinch at the mark on her face, the boy from the feed store who brought his dog and tied a ribbon around its neck like it was part of the wedding party. They brought bread, honey, and a bottle of apple brandy that had waited years for a reason to be opened. Clara wore blue, not bright, not flashy, just a soft tone that matched the river. Elias wore his cleanest shirt and a coat he hadn't taken out since his father's funeral. He didn't shave, didn't need to. She liked his beard the way it was. The ceremony was short. There were no vows, just promises whispered beneath the sound of wind in the trees. Elias took her hand and pressed it to his chest. "You saved me," he said. Claire reached up, traced the faded scar above his collarbone. "You saw me." They kissed, and the dog barked, and someone clapped too early, and the whole thing dissolved into laughter and soft music from a fiddle no one expected. That night, when the guests had gone and the fire had died down and the moon was high enough to touch the tops of the trees, Clara and Elias lay on the rug in front of the hearth. Her head rested on his chest and his fingers moved through her hair, slow and thoughtful. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" she asked. "The men?" "The fear." Elias stared at the ceiling, eyes following the grain of the wood. "Maybe," he said, "but we'll be here when it does, and we'll still be standing when it leaves." She didn't answer, just shifted closer, her breath soft against his collarbone. They woke late the next morning. The sun had already climbed past the tree line. Clara made coffee while Elias milked the goat, a gift from the blacksmith's wife. And by mid-morning, the world had returned to its rhythm. But the rhythm was different now. People came more often. Not many, not all at once, but slowly, gently. A girl who wanted to learn to read. A young boy who brought eggs from his mother's farm and stayed to hear Clara read aloud from her poetry book. The widow asked if Clara would help sew a quilt. The blacksmith's son asked if Elias would show him how to split wood without ruining the grain. The cabin became something else, not just a home, but a place where silence wasn't lonely, where survival had given way to living. Clara began to keep a journal, her handwriting careful, deliberate. She filled it with stories, memories, recipes, half-written songs. One page at a time, she rewrote herself. Elias built a bench beneath the cedar tree where they were married. Sometimes he sat there alone, carving small animals out of wood and leaving them on stumps for passing children to find. He whittled one that looked like a fox, another that looked like Clara's old mule, and one that looked nothing like anything, just a swirl of shapes that he liked the feel of. When autumn came, Clara taught the local children to gather herbs. She showed them how to dry lavender, how to steep wild mint for tea, how to grind bark into powder that soothed a cough. She wore her scar uncovered. The children didn't ask. They didn't need to. One evening, as the air turned crisp and gold, Elias came home to find Clara in the garden. She was humming, sleeves rolled up, hands buried in the soil. He stood watching her for a long moment. "You sing more now," he said. She looked up. "I remember the words again." He stepped closer. "What else do you remember?" She thought for a moment. "That I used to be afraid of silence. And now? Now it feels like home." The sun dipped behind the trees. A breeze moved through the leaves, soft and steady. Clara stood, brushed the dirt from her palms, and took his hand. "Come sit with me," she said. They walked to the bench under the cedar. The bark was warm from the day, and the world was quiet in that soft way that only happens when nothing is wrong. No one was chasing. No one was hiding. The past still lived, but it no longer ruled. The scars were still there, but they no longer bled. Elias rested his arm behind her shoulders. She leaned into him. "What do you want tomorrow to be?" he asked. She closed her eyes. "Exactly like today," she whispered, "but maybe with pie." He chuckled, a low sound in his chest. "I'll chop the apples," he said. And under the cedar trees, the wind whispered stories to the leaves, and two people, once broken, now whole in the quietest way, sat together with nothing to fear and everything to feel. They didn't need forever. They had now. And that was enough. In the wild edges of a world shaped by hardship and silence, two souls found each other, not in perfection, but in truth. Elias didn't save Clara, and Clara didn't need saving. Together they healed, not by forgetting the past, but by facing it and choosing love anyway. Because sometimes, the strongest kind of love isn't loud or dramatic. It's the kind that stays, listens, and never asks you to hide. If this story stirred your heart, imagine what else waits beneath the dust and dusk of the untamed frontier. Subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles and saddle up for more unforgettable tales of grit, healing, and unexpected romance on the edge of civilization. Don't miss a single heartbeat beneath the wide western sky. Hit that subscribe button now and ride with us into the next great love story.